This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazoff.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazoff Gang. Tonight, another fantastic program with another fantastic guest. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, we're a fan-generated program. We're only here because of you. We're still experiencing a lot of shadow banning. The deep state is after us as always. Please subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble channels. Press instant notifications. Visit JamieGlazoff.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and perhaps more importantly, if you have some extra finances, support us to help us keep going. Follow us at Jamie Glazoff on Twitter and Facebook, but most importantly, liveuptofreedom.com is the website of the one and only, the great Annie Cyrus, that's fighting on the front lines for liberty and freedom throughout the world. Please support Annie. What an honor and privilege to have with us this evening James DiEugenio, one of the leading Kennedy assassination theorists on the planet. He is the co-author of the new book, The JFK Assassination Chokeholds, that inescapably proved there was a conspiracy. James, to whom do I owe this honor?
Well, I want to get more people interested in my book. Okay. I think it's a pretty good book.
It's a fascinating book, James, but I can also call you Jim, I think, if that's okay. Jim, fascinating book. I've been reading it the last couple weeks. I just want to personally thank you. I've been preoccupied and obsessed with this since I was 13 or 14 years old. It's very close to my heart. And you're just solidifying and just crystallizing so much of the truth. Now, before we get to some of the things that we need to talk about, I just want to talk about you here for a moment. You're the author of several books on this. Your books are a companion piece to Oliver Stone's two recent documentaries. You wrote the script, the script for those two documentaries, if I'm not mistaken. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and all this great work that you've done.
Well, in total, I have 5 books out there. Okay. And they were Destiny Betrayed, the JFK Assassination, The Evidence Today. I was a co-editor of a book called The Assassinations, which is about all 4 major assassinations of the 60s. JFK, Malcolm, MLK, and RFK. JFK Revisited is really the scripts for the 2 documentaries that Oliver Stone put out, I think in 2021, which is JFK Revisited, which is a 2-hour version, and JFK Destiny Betrayed, which is the 4-hour version. And this most recent one, which I'm a contributor to, is the JFK Assassination Chokeholds. Okay. And what we did in that, and my co-authors, I had 4 co-authors on this, we tried to pick the 9 or 10 most compelling pieces of evidence, which are supplemented by the new evidence that came out through the Assassinations Record Review Board. And we picked these because we didn't think there would be any benign explanation about these areas of evidence. You couldn't explain it away in any kind of innocent manner. Okay. And that's why they're called chokeholds. All right. Because, we decided on these, we put our heads together literally. Okay. What are the 10 areas which you can't dismiss no matter how hard you try? All right. And we also, this is, I think, the first book to go into the lawsuit that is being prosecuted. Well, a lot of it's been decided already about why the government will not give us the last of the Kennedy documents. All right. because there's still 3,600 documents that are either redacted in part or completely denied. That the 61 years later, I think it's time enough that you can put the you can dispose of these at last to the American public. Uh, and we had a couple of attorneys on our team which who were involved with that case, and they talked about it in the book. Finally, Andrew Eiler, an attorney from Canada, did a very good job of explaining why, with neither the Warren Commission nor the House Select Committee on Assassinations, why there was no standard of proof in either one of those legal proceedings. I'm sure you're aware in the law, there's three standards of proof. There's what we call by the preponderance of the evidence, which is what you have to accomplish for a civil case. Okay. There's a clear and compelling standard, which is for administrative law. And finally, for any felony, it's called beyond a reasonable doubt. It used to be to a moral certainty. Today, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, Andrew studied the origins of these standards, and then he applied them to the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee. And he came to the conclusion that they didn't apply any of these to, to their investigations. So, how can you convict a man of murder when you can't even meet the lowest standard of proof, let alone the highest? And I'm pretty sure that's the only book that actually delves into this. One last point about that. In researching this, Andrew found out that the beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty standard, that was devised not so much to protect the defendant, but to protect the community from the collective guilt that they would have convicted and sentenced a man to death who had not committed the crime. Now, does anything ring more true in the Oswald case than that? Okay. That's why we've had this tremendous doubt and uncertainty about the Kennedy case since 1963. Okay. The public has been haunted by this, for 61 years. And that's why it won't go away.
Thank you, Jim. Well, supposed to be released with Trump, then Pompeo, who I think we can agree is some kind of deep stater. He's begging Trump not to release them. Roger Stone, has commented on quite a bit of this. And he said that Trump said to him, some of what I saw in there was just absolutely horrible. So that makes us think. So then now Biden is kicking the can down the street again, if that's a term we can use. But
what Biden did is even worse than what Trump did.
it's illegal. It's actually illegal. Yeah.
Actually, you're correct on that. I believe what Biden did is actually illegal. It breaks both the spirit of the law and the technical part of the law. Okay. It's not just a matter of going against the spirit of the law. He has actually broken the law. All right. What he did, and so your viewers will understand this, what Trump did was delay the process. Okay. For first 6 months, then 3 years. Biden then came in and he literally altered the law. See, the JFK Act passed in 1992 has a prejudice, a bias in it towards declassification. And the longer it goes on, the stronger that bias is supposed to be. And in fact, the review board, should I explain what that is? Do you listeners, viewers know what that is? Should I explain that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. See, the review board made a series of what they called final determinations for every single document they had. And what we found out is that every single document, well, let me change that. Nearly all the documents had a final determination of like 2006 to something like 2009. All right. So, in other words, what Biden is doing is actually breaking what the review board actually deemed was good and proper and justified on their part. Okay. Now, I really hope that Bobby Kennedy, who I'm sure you're aware of, wants to put his, I think it's his daughter-in-law. This story just came out a couple of days ago. A deputy director of the CIA, so she can go ahead and make sure the very last of these documents are declassified because he sincerely believes that the CIA killed his uncle. Well, a lot of people think that. Okay, and so if he can use this final determination notice to convince Trump to go ahead and declassify the last of the documents, and we'll finally see after 61 years what was so secret about what was in those Kennedy assassination classifications.
Well, thank you, Jim. And as you document in all your work and in this new book, CIA's never cooperated, to say the least. So, look, this takes about maybe 12 hours just even to start a good conversation. So
you, you
tonight,
you don't plan on holding me till 6 o'clock in the morning, do you?
I know. And so I'm very torn and I agonize before an interview like this because I just think, Jamie, what can I possibly just talk about? So I just want to talk about a few moments in time, okay? So let's just start with Oswald and some of the things that you guys crystallize and you crystallize with these chokeholds. And I love that expression. Just in terms of a chokehold, it's undisputable. There's nothing else that can be said, and I love that you guys have done that. So apparently, Warren Commission and CIA and all what the official version is, lone nut assassin. Okay, so empirical evidence, intelligence connected individual. So there's even some of the recent documents that have come out that Roger Stone has talked about. A 1099 has showed up from the FBI to Oswald. Very interesting. So informant working for the FBI to some degree. He attended some kind of CIA school to learn the Russian language. Very interesting. Now, a lot of evidence, as your book shows, fake defector. So even when he comes back, and you've talked about Betsy Wolfe, the file that's supposed to be on a defector, the CIA doesn't treat him like they would a standard defective. I think it's the 201 file. Betsy Wolfe has talked about this. So right off the get-go right there, something's not right, right?
I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the book. This is the first book that has the discoveries of Betsy Wolfe for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And the reason it is because they were not declassified till 2006. And I was lucky enough to know a guy who was going through the files at NARA, okay, the archives. And he said, Jim, are you familiar with this? What Betsy Wolfe did with the Oswald file? I go, I never even heard of Betsy Wolfe. Okay, he goes, I'm going to send it to you then. She was the person in charge of the CIA Oswald file for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. She asked for every charter in the CIA before she began her work. She went through all of them. I think there's 9 divisions. And then from that, she outlined on a graph, okay, well, this is what Oswald's file should do then. All right, so then she asked for the file. And guess what? It didn't do anything like that. Okay. So then she determined that it should have gone to something called the SR division, Soviet Russia. It didn't do that. It went to some place called OS, the Office of Security. All right. And so the Office of Security does not open 201 files. That is the most common file in the whole CIA. Okay. any person who does anything of interest will have a 201 file. Now, I believe if you defected to the Soviet Union and you offer them radar secrets, I think you'd be a person of interest, wouldn't you? Okay. And so there wasn't one opened on Oswald for 13 months. So she's very, very puzzled. So she calls in guy after guy after guy at the CIA and she asks them, how did this? And they all agree with her. You're right. It should have gone to the SR division, number one, and there should have been a 201 file open. So two or three people all agree with her who had worked for the CIA. Finally, in late 1978, when the House Select Committee is about to close down, she calls in this guy named Robert Gambino. And Robert Gambino was in charge of the Office of Security at that time. That's why she wanted to talk to him. He goes, look, it doesn't matter how many documents come in, and it doesn't matter if they're pre-stamped. Okay. If the client goes to the first gate, which is the Office of Mail Logistics, and he makes a request, they will go to that client and that client only. Now, I don't have to tell you or anybody else listening to this show. This means that somebody was rigging Oswald's file as he went to the Soviet Union.
Yes.
How on earth could you do something like, why would you do something like that? Okay, now here's the capper. Betsy Wolf's notes, to my knowledge, were never typed into memoranda form. They're all handwritten. So thank God she had good handwriting. Okay. And they're not in the HSCA volumes. Can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine not putting something that important into the HSCA volumes? Okay. So anyway, that's one of the more interesting, well, it might be one of the two, three, or four most interesting parts
Yeah.
of the book, that whole tale.
Absolutely, Jim. And look, so this is the Cold War. You've got a defector spending a couple years behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. Then he decides to come back. Wouldn't you think that the intelligence community would debrief him?
Well, according to the CIA, they never did. Okay.
So he just comes back and he just starts wandering around. It's absurd. It's absurd.
Who goes to the Soviet Union for a little bit over 2 years, about 2.5 years. Okay. And he offers to sell them, rather to give them radar secrets. And he had worked right at the base where the U-2 was at Sugi in Japan. Okay. So you would think that at the very least, the CIA would want to debrief him. You know, what did you tell the Russians? Did they try and recruit you? Why did they send you out of Moscow? Why did they send you to Minsk, 400 miles away? What happened when you, well, according to the CIA, they did not debrief him. All right, which is unbelievable. I don't believe it. I will never believe it. And I think it's a lie. Okay, they had to debrief him somewhere.
Yeah, they're lying. They're lying. And okay, so this Oswald, we've also got him being impersonated, as you've documented, I think about 17 times. J. Edgar Hoover has admitted this, and he was being impersonated in New Orleans while he's in the Soviet Union.
Right, that's true. Okay, that article was written by a guy named Matt Crumpton, who's a lawyer from Columbus, Ohio. It's the best essay I've ever read on the impersonations of Lee Harvey Oswald. Even I did not think there were 17 of them. Okay, but there were. And it went all the way up to a couple of days before the assassination of JFK. All right, that's what's so extraordinary about this. And as you said also, his name was being used while he was in the Soviet Union. I mean, that is just amazing that somebody used his name when he was in the Soviet Union. All right. Now let me just name a couple of these, okay? Because we, like you said, we'd be here for 12 hours going through every one of them. There's one at Sylvia Odio's apartment in late September of 1963, where a couple of Cuban exiles knock on her door. They're trying to get money for an anti-Castro cause. The third guy is she identified as Oswald. She told them, no, I don't have access to any money for this. Her sister was there also, Annie Odio. All right. Now, that guy, the Cuban exile, calls her back a couple days later. And this is the really startling part of the story. He says, what did you think of Leon? And she said, I didn't think anything of him. Well, he says that we should have killed Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs. And he's kind of loco. Leon's kind of loco. Now, on the day of the assassination, like everybody else, she's watching television. Oswald's picture comes on the TV. She literally faints because it's him. Okay. Her sister has to take her to the hospital and they give her smelling salts. Okay. And her sister looks at her and she looks at her sister. It's him. That's the guy who was at our apartment. Okay. Except the Warren Commission says it's not him. You know why they say it's not him? Because Oswald was in Mexico City. Okay. Here's the problem with that. He made a total of 5 visits to the Russian embassy and the Cuban embassy. So there should be 10 pictures because the CIA had cameras in front of both entrances. Okay. So going in and coming out, there should be 10 pictures. In 61 years, the CIA has never been able to produce one picture, let alone 10. One picture of Oswald going in or coming out of either embassy. On the night of the assassination, the CIA sent a tape up to Dallas because the FBI was interviewing Oswald that night. And the CIA sends a tape up there, and this is his voice when he was in Mexico City. Except J. Edgar Hoover writes a memo, and he says, the agents in Dallas who have been interviewing Oswald have listened to this tape. This is not Oswald. Okay. So even though he was there and he made all these entrances and exits, the CIA has never been able to come up with either a tape recording or a picture of him. Here's the clincher. Here's the clincher. When the Warren Commission interviewed Sylvia Odio, the lawyer that they sent down to Dallas to take her deposition was a guy named Wesley Liebler. After they deposed her, Liebler offered to buy her dinner. Okay. And he said to her, even if we find any evidence of conspiracy, we've been told by Earl Warren to cover it up. She couldn't believe this. Okay. Here's the lawyer for the Warren Commission who's supposed to be deposing her. And he's telling her that the Warren Commission is a cover up. That story did not come out until Gaten Fonzie interviewed Sylvia Odio for the Church Committee in 1975. And when she said that, he was stunned, as I think anybody would be. Okay. And he said, Liebler said that? And she said, yes, he did. And I'll swear to it on a Bible. So this is what the Warren Commission comes down to. He can't be at her door because he's in Mexico City, but the CIA can't prove he's in Mexico City. So where is he? And that's
And
just a couple of them.
yeah, and the person that was sent to Mexico City posing as Oswald is not Oswald.
No,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
best evidence we have of that is the woman at the
yeah,
Cuban embassy who said that he was short and blonde. Well, that's not Oswald.
yeah.
Okay, that's who she remembered.
Jim, something that really is on my mind for years is when they arrested Oswald, he had asked to make a phone call. And his last phone call, they didn't let it go through. But the witnesses behind the scenes that know and saw everything The phone call was made to an individual by the name of John Hurt, a former special agent for U.S. counterintelligence. Why would a lone nut assassin who's crazy and has nothing to do with intelligence be calling U.S. counterintelligence?
I'm really glad you brought this up because it's a very interesting story. On Saturday night, Oswald went ahead and made out a form requesting to make a phone call. All right. He passed the form to the secretary. The secretary had to get it cleared by the Secret Service. All right. The Secret Service denied the call, but the secretary then put that form in the trash basket. But the other secretary thought this was kind of interesting. So she picked it up out of the trash basket and then she showed it to an attorney where she lived. Okay. On the form was the phone number of John Hurt, who lived in North Carolina at that time. All right. John Hurt was a former military intelligence, counterintelligence officer. And about 300 miles away from where he was a place called Nag's Head, which was a base which ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, used to school and then launch military defectors into the Soviet Union. All right. Victor Marchetti used to work for the CIA, looked at this, and he said, you know, I think Oswald signed his own death warrant when he when he requested to make that phone call. Because of course the next day Jack Ruby comes in and shoots him. All right. So Marchetti might have been right about that. You know, the fact that he wanted to talk to this guy suggested that he wanted to know what they wanted him to say and what they wanted him to do, if they were going to supply him with a lawyer, okay, etc. That kind of thing. That's what Marchetti was talking about. I agree with that.
Jim, the 5444 Camp Street, all that Cuban activity. So we've got the pro Castro office on this side, but there's an anti Castro office on the other side. Just all that stuff that Oswald was involved in and being this Marxist pro Castro guy handing out leaflets. It's very clear that he was not an anti Castro guy, right?
Well, Oswald was supposed to be masquerading as a pro Castro guy.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, I think did I misspeak? I meant that did I say it's very clear that he wasn't pro Castro?
Yes, I
Right.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I see both the CIA and the FBI had anti Fair Play for Cuba Committee campaigns going on at this time. All right. And it's very hard to take a look at the 544 Camp Street address. All right. And not come to and there was a number of witnesses who actually saw him there. All right. In fact, there were two INS agents who saw him go into that building. And that building housed Guy Bannister's offices in the summer of 1963. Guy Bannister was an extreme, I really don't think you can get much more extreme than this guy, was an extreme right winger who did all kinds of surveillance jobs on segregation, on communists, tried to track down every pro Castro resident in New Orleans.
He wouldn't have a pro Castro organization working in that office.
Right. So you could snooker and find out what other pro Castro people there were in New Orleans. Okay. Oswald slipped up, and on one of the flyers, he put down Bannister's address, 544 Camp Street. Okay. And this was Bannister was, to put it mildly, was very upset about this. Okay. We have this from his secretary who said he was angry about it. All right. And Oswald then got into a provoked street fight with Carlos Bringuier, who was a sincerely anti-Castro guy working for the DRE, the student Estudiante directory. It's translated. It's uh, it's a youth organization, all right, and they got into this fist fight. Now, Oswald didn't throw a punch. Bringuier threw a punch. So why is Oswald the guy who goes to jail that night? And why is Oswald the guy who ends up paying a fine in court? Okay, but this is what happened. Oswald was trying to collect publicity for his supposedly pro Castro front in New Orleans, and at the same time discredit the Fair Play for Cuba Committee out of New York. All right. So I think most logical people would believe that Oswald was acting as what they call an agent provocateur inside the Fair Play for Cuba Committee organization.
Jim, there's an individual by the name of Ralph Yates that picked up a very interesting hitchhiker during a very significant moment. Could you tell us about that?
This is one of the things that's in Matt Crumpton's essay. Okay. It was originally written about, I think, by Jim Douglas in his book, JFK and the Unspeakable. All right. And Yates worked for a refrigeration company. All right. And he said he was driving in the vicinity of Dealey Plaza a couple of days before the assassination. And he picked up a guy. Okay. Oh, no, excuse me. It was further down than Dealey Plaza. It was off the Stemmons Freeway. All right. And he picked up a guy who wanted to go in the area of Dealey Plaza. All right. And the guy had a kind of brown bag in which he said he was he was carrying, okay, uh, you know, hangers for drapes. Okay. All right. And he asked him, did you hear that Kennedy's coming to Dallas in a couple of days? All right. And Ralph said, no, I didn't know that. Yeah. Why don't you drop me off right over here? And it was like a block away from the Texas School Book Depository. Okay, so obviously, a couple days later, when all the news breaks, all right, Ralph is, that's the guy that's the guy I picked up. Okay. And he said that he wanted to go near the Texas School Book Depository. Now, here was Ralph Yates' problem. The FBI didn't want to believe him. Okay. They really did not want to believe him. Okay. And he insisted that what he was saying was accurate. All right. They insisted, no, it couldn't be. All right. Because we know where Oswald was. Now, of course, that's something the Warren Commission would say. The whole point is it wasn't really Oswald. Okay. So they decided that to recommend to his family that he go into a sanitarium. All right. For a few weeks. Well, a few weeks turned out to be pretty much the rest of his life. Okay. Because he never gave up on that story. He always insisted that it was true. All right. So this is what happens to certain people who decide that they're going to go against the official story in the JFK case. You get sent to an asylum. All right. And you end up staying there for quite a long time.
Jim, so the official version, Oswald, Lone Nut, taking those 3 shots from the 6th floor of the book depository. Your guys' book pretty well proves that he could not have been on the 6th floor during those shots, correct?
Yeah. It's look, for Oswald to have been on the 6th floor at that time, okay, around 12:30. All right, and to be at that corner of the 6th floor and to do what they said he did, it goes against so much of the evidence that the FBI actually had in their own hands. All right. There was one witness Carolyn Arnold, who said he saw him downstairs at about 12:20. Okay, you know, there was another witness who said he saw him downstairs at about 12:10. All right. Bonnie Ray Williams, who said he was eating his chicken lunch on the 6th floor. He said he didn't leave till about 12:20, maybe a little bit later. So how could Oswald have done this? But the clincher, of course, is the testimony of Sandy Stiles and Victoria Adams and Dorothy Garner. They worked on the 4th floor, Scott Forsman, all right, a book company. They said that they were watching the motorcade, and as the car disappeared under the trestle, they ran out and then ran down the stairs. Okay. They said, we did not see Oswald, and we did not hear anyone coming down those stairs. All right. Which would have been, it was hard enough to believe they wouldn't have seen him. I've been on those stairs. It's almost impossible to believe they wouldn't have heard him. Those are not modern stairs that are kind of short and have some kind of padding over them. Those are the old kind of wooden rickety stairs put together by hammer and nails. So Oswald wasn't wearing slippers that day. All right. So it's hard to believe they would not have heard him coming down those stairs. Now, the Warren Commission, of course, didn't want to believe this. All right. So in other words, what they did, Victoria Adams suggested, why don't you call in Sandy? She'll back up everything I said. They didn't call in Sandy. Okay. Then she said, okay, why don't you do a reconstruction? All right. Let's go through the whole thing. They didn't want to do the reconstruction. The clincher to this is that I think it was June or July, they got a letter from the U.S. attorney in Dallas, all right, Marcia Jo Stroud. Marcia Jo Stroud wrote in her letter that she had talked to Dorothy Garner, who was a supervisor for Victoria and Sandy. She said she came out the doorway and she stood in the hallway, all right, and watched Victoria and Sandy go down. She did not see any trace of Oswald, but she did see Roy Truly and Marion Baker, the policeman, coming up the stairs after Victoria and Sandy had disappeared. Now, I don't see how you can get much better than that. Okay. And now here's the clincher, though. Even though they knew that, that's not in the Warren Commission. Barry Ernest discovered that document in 1999. It would have remained hidden except for the JFK Act.
Thank you, Jim, so much. Arlen Specter on the Warren Commission. Okay, so we know that this whole magic bullet theory, that's another 3-hour conversation, completely absurd. He is provided with a lot of the evidence, a lot of the arguments. And am I not mistaken that one of his answers is, well, we either have to accept the magic bullet theory or we need to look for a second assassin. And the context of that is we can't look for a second assassin because we're not allowed to. So we have to accept the magic bullet theory.
Pretty much true. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Edward Epstein interviewed Specter way back in 1966, 65 for his book Inquest. He did not release this information until 2016. He did that in online form. Then he put it in his very last book, which I think was published before he passed away, which I think was about 2022 or 2023. Specter told him, and this goes hand in glove with what I told you about Wesley Liebler and Silviodio. All right. He asked Specter, why didn't the Secret Service come up with the magic bullet theory the way you did. And Spectre said words of the effect, because they didn't know that if you didn't allow for the magic bullet theory, you'd have to be looking for a second assassin. Okay. This is what he said flat out to Epstein. And he said, well, how did you convince the Warren Commission that you were right? Inspector said, I went in, I put in the Zapruder film, I showed it to them in slow motion. And that's what I said to them. I said, we either go with the single bullet theory or we start looking for a second assassin. And of course, they were not going to do that, especially because this was like April or May of 1964. So just the trail's 6 months old. Okay. And so that is how they came to abide by the magic bullet. Now, what is the magic bullet? The magic bullet says that Commission Exhibit 399 went through both Kennedy and Governor John Connolly's in the front seat. It made 7 wounds in 2 people. All right. It shattered 2 bones, the 5th rib of John Connolly and his wrist bone. Okay. It then turned around and entered into his upper left thigh. Okay. And it somehow worked its way out onto a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. Now, if that's not bad enough, the amazing thing about this bullet is that it's virtually unscathed. If you take a look at it, all right, and in any kind of pictorial rendition, you know, it's only lost something like 7 or 8 grains of its volume, which is absolutely unbelievable. All right. And on top of that, on top of that, when Josiah Thompson went to interview O.P. Wright, who was one of the 2 people who discovered CE 399 at Parkland Hospital, Thompson showed him a picture, all right, of CE 399 taken out of the Warren Commission volumes. And Wright says, that's the bullet that they said I gave them? And he goes, yeah, this is the bullet you were supposed to have given to the Secret Service. And he says, no, that's not the bullet I gave them. And since he was the chief of security at Parkland Hospital, he opened his drawer and he took out a bullet and said, this is the kind of bullet that I gave him. CE 399 is a round nosed bullet, copper coated. He took out a hunting round, which is sharp nosed. Okay. This is the kind of bullet that I gave them. So at the end of the interview, Thompson's leaving and O.P. Wright is still stunned. Thompson said he followed me down the hallway. And he said, are you sure that's the bullet that they said I gave them? And he said, yes. Okay. So something like this would get the case thrown out of court, in about 10 minutes if somebody like O.P. Wright would have gone on the stand. But, of course, Spectre understood this. And guess what? O.P. Wright was not deposed.
Jim, so they send one individual that picks up a hitchhiker and hears things he's not supposed to hear. They put him into a mental asylum. There's a doctor by the name of Dr. Perry who, at a press conference after the assassination, said several times that in terms of the neck wounds and the back of the head wounds, it's very clear that the shots came from the front. Am I correct that when he came down after giving his talk, that somebody grabbed a hold of him and said, no, that's not what happened. Don't ever say that again?
That's pretty much accurate. Okay. Malcolm Perry was the guy who did the tracheotomy on the president, which means he carved into his neck to put an air channel, okay, through his neck. He had the closest view of the neck wound from the front. All right. At that press conference, by the way, which took place at 2 o'clock, about an hour after Kennedy was killed, all right, three times, he said, that the neck wound had all the appearances of being an entrance wound. All right. 3 times. As he was leaving that press conference, somebody in a suit and tie and very nice leather shoes grabbed him by the arm and said, "Don't you ever say that again." All right. That night, I'm not talking about a week later. I'm not talking a couple days later. That night, Perry was called from Bethesda, which was the hospital where they did the autopsy later that evening. 2 of the doctors got on the phone. I believe it was Jim Humes and Thornton Boswell. And they tried to talk him out of the story. So, in other words, first at 2 o'clock that afternoon, or a little bit later, then that evening, he gets a phone call from the doctors who did the autopsy. And they say, "Are you sure that that was an entrance wound?" And he said, "Of course I'm sure. I've done this before." And he goes, "Did you turn the body over?" And he goes, "No, but I know enough about wounds to know that that was an entrance wound." Okay. They then threaten to put him before a medical board and have his license revoked. Now, this is astonishing because this is like what, 11 hours later? We're still on the same 24-hour cycle. So, in other words, they know something is wrong from the very beginning. This is like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You know, they don't want it to collapse. So, they're trying to keep a lid on this, and they know how dangerous Malcolm Perry's testimony is.
It's dangerous because they need the lone lunatic gunman theory, 3 shots from the 6th floor, from the back, from the 6th floor of the book depository. Now, in terms of the autopsy, probably the worst autopsy in the history of mankind. There's even evidence to suggest that, okay, so first of all, the photos of the brain are very circumspect. Then the first autopsy, all the documentation is replaced by then another other forms. And then there's even evidence to suggest that they went and got another brain that wasn't JFK's brain. Then the final brain that they have weighs way too much. And Jackie Kennedy, and just our hearts go out to her. Apparently, she was holding pieces of JFK's brain in her hand afterwards. Why I bring that up is it couldn't have been the brain that they ended up saying was JFK's brain. This is all a mess and very corrupt, right?
Now, before I address this, I want everybody to know that there's nothing fanciful about what I'm going to say. Although it sounds like out of a science fiction movie, this is true, and we can prove it. All right. What you're talking about, this is an essay I wrote for the book.
Yeah.
All right. Now, according to a Danish study where they weighed, I think, 8,000 brains, the average weight for a human brain in an adult is something like 1,340 grams. 1,340 grams. Now, here's the problem. The penciled in weight for JFK's brain is 1,500 grams. So it's 160 grams above the average. Now, let me ask you, everybody here has seen the Zapruder film, all right? At Z frame 313, Kennedy's head explodes, and you have this jet going out, blood and tissue, okay, going out of his head, all right? Then you have the pictures of the limousine, the back seat. There's all this blood and tissue, okay, in the back seat of that limousine. Then you have Jackie Kennedy going out the back of the car, trying to grab something from the trunk. And they asked her later, "What were you doing?" "My husband's brain went out the back of the car. I was trying to retrieve part of it." And then she actually gave it to the doctor at Parkland Hospital. You have the cyclists. You have two cyclists on the left side of Kennedy One of the guys got hit so hard that he thought he was hit by a bullet. All right. His partner told him at Parkland Hospital, "You got some tissue between your teeth." All right. So, in other words, what I'm saying is, how in God's name could Kennedy's brain weigh above the average when we've seen it explode all over Dealey Plaza? All right. Now, here's the clincher. When the review board interviewed the official autopsy photographer, guy by the name of John Stringer, they put these pictures up on an easel in front of him. And they asked him, "Do you mind going up there and taking a look at these photos, all right, that you allegedly took of Kennedy's brain, okay, post mortem as part of the autopsy?" So Stringer walks up there and he's very puzzled by what he sees. And he mutters, like under his breath, "This is Ansco film. I didn't use Ansco. I used Kodak Ektachrome. And you see these numbers here at the bottom? This means this was part of a press pack. It was taken in series. That's why they have numbers. I didn't use a press pack. I used dual holders." All right. And so the lawyer for the review board asks him, he goes, "Are you ready to deny that you took these pictures?" And Stringer said, "If that's Ansco and that's a press pack, I didn't take these pictures," which leaves us with two big questions. Number one, who did take the pictures? And second, why did there have to be another set of pictures? All right. And that's because, as we had in JFK Revisited, we actually had a neurosurgeon, okay, say that this cannot be Kennedy's brain. So what happened is that they substituted somebody else's brain. And the reason Gary Aguilar said this, he's another doctor who we had on the program. He said there was too much damage to Kennedy's brain. It would have revealed too much, that it wasn't just one single bullet. Now, here's the last piece of evidence on that. In a gunshot homicide case, you're supposed to dissect the fatal wound, which means you track it. Okay. You do that with the brain. How do you do that with the brain? You put it in a solution, you let it get more solid. Okay. And then you cut it either bread loaf style, straight cuts horizontally, or diagonally like a pie cut. And that way you can track either the bullet or bullets that went through the brain. If you can believe it, and by now you probably can, this was never done. This is incredible. This was never done, okay, during the entire autopsy or the days later. All right. Something is really rotten in Denmark, okay, about this whole issue.
Jim, and you're like you say, you're supposed to dissect the front and back throat wounds, etc. And finally, they had Dr. Pierre Fink on the stand during the Garrison trial, and he admitted that there were people in the room that stopped him from doing a dissection of the wound.
That's absolutely true. During the trial of Clay Shaw in New Orleans in 1969, one of the assistant attorneys for Jim Garrison, and by the way, Fink was not called by Garrison. He was actually called by the defense. Clay Shaw's lawyers called him. All right. And they asked him, because the other wound to Kennedy was in the back. So this guy asked him, "Dr. Fink, why did you not dissect the back wound?" He wouldn't answer. This goes on in the transcript. Alvin Oster, who was the assistant DA, had to ask him 8 times why he did not dissect that wound. Finally, he had to turn to the judge. Okay. And t- he's avoiding the question. Can you please request that he answer the question? All right. And so he finally came out and said there were many military brass that were in the room that night, and they prevented us from dissecting the back wound. All right. Generals and admirals. Okay. And when you're in that kind of a situation, all right, you do things according to plan. Yeah. See, now, in any other story, that should have been on the headline of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times the next day. Okay. You won't read about it in any of those things. The only newspaper you'll read it about is in the local New Orleans newspapers. Okay. Because they had a reporter there every single day, writing it up and giving it to the department head to put it in the paper.
Well, Jim, it all sounds so crazy, but as it all begins to add up, and you have stated your belief that this has been planned beforehand and the cover up was also planned beforehand, it almost seems undeniable.
I tend to agree with that. I believe that the cover up was pre-planned with the
Mm.
conspiracy, and that's why you had all those guys in the Bethesda morgue who shouldn't have been there. And
Yeah.
reportedly, one of JFK's strong opponents, Curtis LeMay, was there. The Joint Chief of Staff of the Air Force, was there that night.
Smoking a cigar.
What on earth would LeMay be doing coming into Bethesda, okay, to see something like this? All right, and he supposedly lit up a cigar.
Jim, so you've talked about this bullet. So there's a bullet that showed up on a stretcher. Then many years later, former Secret Service agent Paul Landis comes out and says he found a bullet. That this is something doesn't add up, right?
Yeah, it's too many bullets because he said he found that bullet in the back seat of the car. Okay, and I think he actually said it was on the top of the seat. Okay, all right, and he brought that in and he put it on uh, what he thought was JFK's stretcher. All right. So this is too many bullets because that cannot be because that's not how they found CE-399. Okay. CE-399, whichever way you want to decipher it, was not on Kennedy's stretcher. All right. And by the way, he's not alone in saying that. There's a couple of other witnesses. I think one was Phyllis Hall, a nurse, who said, "Yeah, I saw a bullet on what I thought was Kennedy's stretcher at Parkland Hospital." All right. So, as of course you must know, the official story says it's three bullets. That's it, because there were three shells found on the sixth floor of the depository. So this is obviously too many bullets.
But Jim, there's no way Oswald pulled that off by himself from the sixth floor, right? It's impossible. Also, so many witnesses. This has to be for another show, I think. But so many witnesses saw smoke at the grassy knoll. All the evidence of the shots coming from the front. People saying at the grassy knoll that they were approached by Secret Service, but then the Secret Service had to admit that there were no Secret Service people assigned there. I mean, we could go on and on. Then Jim Garrison has his trial on this that targets this individual, Clay Shaw, that denies he's CIA, but then later it comes out that he's CIA. But you would think that the Central Intelligence Agency would cooperate with an investigation that's trying to find out who murdered the President of the United States. The CIA not only does not cooperate, but they monitor and harass Jim Garrison's witnesses.
Yes,
Something very wrong there, right?
right. Bob Tannenbaum, who was the first deputy counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, said he found these documents that came out of Richard Helms' office, that they were monitoring, surveilling, and harassing Jim Garrison's witnesses. All right. Now, why would you do that if you had nothing to do with the case? There's this old saying by a Yale lawyer, Allard Lowenstein. In my experience, people with nothing to hide don't hide things. Okay, so why would you be doing you actually it's beyond that because you're actually interfering. You're interfering with a judicial investigation. So that's beyond that's actually what they call obstruction of justice. And that's what the CIA was doing. All right. And let me add this as another example. We talked about Pierre Fink in New Orleans. That testimony was so damaging to the official story that the Department of Justice called in Boswell, one of the other uh, pathologists, and they wanted him to go down there and discredit Pierre Fink. I wish I was imagining this, but I'm really not. This is actually true. They called in Boswell and they gave him instructions to go down to New Orleans. We need you to discredit Fink because he's doing a lot of damage to the story. And Harry Connick, who was the DA in New Orleans, the excuse me, at that time he was a U.S. attorney in New Orleans, met him at a dock down there, and then told him to go to this hotel, and he had it all set up for him. You know, he had a bottle of wine there with Fink's testimony. All right, for him to go over. Now they ended up not calling him. I think that was a good thing because if they would have called him, Garrison would have brought up the fact. Well, wait a minute. Isn't Pierre Fink a forensic pathologist? He's a certified forensic pathologist. And Boswell would, yes. Are you a certified forensic pathologist? And he would have said, no. And so, what are you doing, testifying against somebody who has better qualifications than you have? That's what would have happened.
Jim, the Zapruder film definitely shows us that it was not from the back of the sixth floor of the book depository. But there's something a little bit wrong with this Zapruder film as well. May I ask you, was the Zapruder film touched by somebody afterwards?
There's there's a lot of people in this day and age who believe that the Zapruder film was altered. On this particular issue, I'm kind of an agnostic
Hmm.
on it. Okay, I never said that I was a film and photographic guy. But what problems that people see in it is that on certain renditions of the film, there appears to be a blacked out part of Kennedy's rear skull.
Hmm.
Okay. And many researchers have commented on this, you know. But the people who are trying to find out the truth about this, a film editor named Sidney Wilkinson, somehow she can't get the first generation transparencies, okay, which were supposed to have been done by Time Life because they bought the film. Because she wants to compare, okay, that with the extant Zapruder film. All right. So yes, there are people who believe that the Zapruder film has been altered. Yes.
Jim, so Jack Ruby gets very close to Oswald, kills him. You got to ask yourself, how does this guy get so close to him? And you guys have shown beyond reasonable doubt that Ruby received assistance in murdering Oswald from larger forces. And then later, afterwards, Ruby was actually saying a whole bunch of stuff, but he wasn't listened to and silenced. Let me hand that over to you.
The official story has Ruby coming down the Main Street ramp. All right. That's what the Warren Commission said. The House Select Committee disagreed with this. All right. They produced a witness, Donald Flush, who worked for the Dallas PD at that time, and said that, look, I was parked catty corner right across the street from the Main Street ramp, and I know who Jack Ruby is. I stayed there the whole time. He said, there's no way on God's earth that Ruby came down that Main Street ramp. All right. So, what most people believe today, and I believe this also, is that Ruby was at the Western Union Station at exactly the right time, exactly the right place, because the Western Union Station is right across the street from the back entrance to the Dallas Police Headquarters. So all somebody had to do was wait at that door, okay, all right, and open that door at about the time that Ruby was there, okay, and then he could have come in from the back end. All right. Now, also, if you've ever seen these films called Evidence of Revision, and I think they're on YouTube, this guy got these extraordinary films that I never seen before. It's very clear that Ruby is hiding behind Blackie Harrison. All right. One of the Dallas police officers, a big guy, like 6'3", 250 pounds. Okay. And Ruby is hiding behind him. Then something very weird happens. All right. A horn goes off at the time that Oswald enters the foyer. Okay. Then a second horn goes off and Ruby springs forward and shoots him. Will Fritz, the captain of the Dallas police, was supposed to be in front of Oswald. He was not. And this is what allowed Ruby to get off that one clear shot
Mm.
that killed Oswald and silenced him forever.
Yeah, and Oswald did say that he was a patsy during all of this. I
Yes.
I don't want to exhaust you too much this evening, Jim. I don't want to exhaust our viewers too much. We're gonna have to bring you back, but let's just go on our last hurdle here. Before you do, the brilliant Annie Cyrus always adds some tremendous wisdom to our program. Annie, what do you think about our discussion this evening? Do you have a question for Jim or any wisdom you'd like to offer?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for me to add any wisdom to this discussion. Absolutely fascinating discussion. I will admit, Jim, I have not started reading your book, but now I have to go and read your book. And
Thank you.
it's definitely doing what I do as a producer. I have produced shows with discussion of this specific topic, but I'll admit I've never heard such a detail and I would use the word convincing discussion. So thank you for that, both Jamie and Jim. And
Okay.
I don't forgive me as I don't have a question about
Okay.
where the discussion has been,
Mm.
but I do want to point something out. And Jim, I would like to have your take on this. To me, it's fascinating. For so many years, the American people have been deprived of the truth, the
Mm.
information, the details. And it feels like we got so used to it because let's fast forward to a few months ago where President Trump, the first assassination of President Trump, to this day, we have no information, nothing. We still don't know who the shooter was. We still don't know if there was a second shooter. We still don't know how it happened, who, nothing. And the fact that the reaction to not knowing was so bare minimum
Mm.
tells me that we have become numb to cover ups, lies, and we just move on with life.
Well, that's one way to look at it. That was a tremendous Secret Service failure in Butler, PA. And I actually was happy to see her go. The chief of the Secret Service was actually fired. Now, that didn't happen in this case, in the Kennedy case. There were many, many Secret Service failures, including about 9 guys getting drunk at a after hours bar called the Cellar till 3 o'clock in the morning on hard liquor. Okay. And having a 7 o'clock call the next day. How do you drink hard liquor all night and wake up 4 hours later and you're supposed to be ready for any kind of emergency? And by the way, what these guys did, they hired the fire department to guard Kennedy while they were getting bombed at the Cellar. Okay. This this was the chief of the Secret Service, James Rowley, should have been fired, and there should have been about 10 agents who also should have been fired over this failure.
Mm.
Okay. Now, I agree with you that that was an incredible collapse of protection for Trump. Okay. And when you have to rely on the counter sniper, okay, to protect the president. I think something is wrong with what you've done up to that time. You know, um, I can't talk about that because I haven't really investigated it. Okay, I don't like talking about controversial incidents that I don't investigate. All right, so I can't go very much further than that.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. And yes, I understand. But it goes back to the point you made, not just about Secret Service. I'm going to expand this to a lot of other agencies that we think this is just happening. But the truth is, this has been happening for
Yes.
decades. And now we're finally seeing it and acknowledging it and understanding it. And I want to say that is thanks to people like you, Jim, because you
Thank you
didn't
so
give it
much.
up. You didn't drop it. You kept putting facts out. So people like me and my fellow Americans are now knowledgeable enough to ask the right question. For that, I appreciate it. Thank you, Jamie, for involving me in this discussion.
Thank you, Annie, very much. So, just in closure,
Can I do a commercial? Okay, here's the book. Okay, the JFK Assassination Chokeholds. All right, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Abbey Books. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can order it from your bookseller. Okay,
absolutely.
I guarantee you that you'll learn something and probably a lot of things. All right, if you read it.
Absolutely. And the viewers got to get it. Look, just in closure, I'd like to say, look, I'm the child of dissidents in the Soviet Union. I'm that story of the young boy whose parents we escaped from the Soviet Union. I love America. And growing up, I didn't want to hear, like CIA bad, FBI bad. I love America and we need to fight the Soviet Union. And I'm still that person, but I had to face what these agencies were. The bad guys that were in power, the bad guys that continue to be in power. And I want to ask you as we end the year of we come to the end of this program, Jim. I don't know. I can't ask you who you maybe think killed Kennedy, but what happened here?
To answer the first question, I believe that it was a triangular conspiracy between the CIA, the Cuban exiles, and then they brought in the mob to, to go ahead and polish off Oswald. I believe Oswald was to be shot at the Texas Theater that day. He was not. They slipped up. Okay. And so they went in and called in their chits with Traficante, who they had hired to kill Castro. Okay. And then Traficante got his buddy McWillie, who knew Ruby very well, okay, to go in and get Jack to go ahead and do this. As far as where we are on this case, look, the media, the mainstream media, which thank God you're not a part of, okay, and that's why you have me on, all right, is going to be in denial about this forever, okay, because they missed the story, all right, they missed the real story. They didn't tell the truth. They were busy covering it up all these years and decades.
Because they follow orders.
They look, and if you work for the MSM, okay, you're obedient to the political establishment because that's where you get your information. All right. And so people like Peter Jennings, people like Dan Rather, people like Walter Cronkite, we're not going to upset the gravy train. They made too much money. All right. And so they went ahead and in lockstep, they went ahead and they recited this fairy tale, okay, about Oswald. Now, what's happened though, and I think you probably know this, when Larry Sabato wrote his book, The Kennedy Half Century, he did a poll through a very distinguished polling company, and he actually did focus groups. They came to the conclusion, and I'm not making up these figures, you can look them up yourself. 91% of the people who were alive back then that were included in this group said that after the Kennedy assassination, the United States underwent a period of cynicism, of skepticism, of depression, which changed the course of what the American spirit was after World War II. All right. 91% said that. Okay. Now, secondly, when Kevin Phillips wrote his book, Arrogant Capital, he put up a chart that polled the loss of people's belief in their government over time. He did it from 1960 to, I believe, 1994, 1995. When Kennedy was inaugurated, that chart was at 75%. In the mid 90s, it dropped down to 19%. The biggest single year drop was 1964, the year the Warren Commission report came out. So this is what's happened to the socio-political fabric of this country, all right, due to this case.
And Jim, I want to be careful here. I don't want to misquote you. It's in my notes from reading your books, watching your interviews, but it is your position, if I'm correct, that we have not had an honest democracy since the Warren Commission.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
And
Our democracy failed us. Our republic failed us. All right, because they let the Warren Commission. Let me imagine how this in this day and age. Can you imagine the mainstream media, these hundreds of reporters, letting an event like this be conducted in total secrecy for about 10 months, never knocking on the door, okay, never, and only taking tidbits from people like J. Edgar Hoover, who was trying to frame Oswald, when in fact he knew Oswald didn't do it.
Mm,
Can you imagine that happening over a period of 10 months?
mm,
The only witness, and I believe that the Warren Commission meeting en banc uh, interviewed about 500 witnesses under deposition. The only witness who said, I refuse to testify at a closed hearing, was Mark Lane. He was the only guy who said, I will not testify in a closed hearing. All right. This is really astonishing when you think about it. All right. And then, of course, what happens is when the Warren Commission comes out. Now, listen very carefully to this. The Warren Commission was issued to the public, I believe, on September the 27th, 1964. On that night, not a week later, not a couple days later, that night, both NBC and CBS put together specials endorsing the Warren Commission report. The NBC special was an hour, the CBS special was 2 hours. Here's my question. How does anybody read 888 pages in one day and put together a documentary based upon that? Okay. The answer is it's impossible. The answer is that they were cooperating with the Warren Commission before it came out to put these shows together. What kind of a news media cooperates with a government agency to put their spin together on a controversial event like this?
disgusting is one word. We just have a little bit of hope, or maybe a lot of hope. We just pray, dear Lord Jesus, let people like RFK Jr. influence Donald Trump and not deep staters like Pompeo. Um, Jim, do you think Trump will release the rest of the documents, or is something else going to happen now?
Well, let's put it this way. There's a lot of pressure on him to do this
Yeah,
because of the whole thing with Andrew Napolitano, okay, the whole thing with Joe Rogan, okay, and now he's got Bobby Kennedy pressuring him.
yeah,
So I think it's going to be very difficult for him to go back on his word. Look, he said in front of millions of people,
yes,
I think that program got 30 million views.
yeah.
He said he would do it.
And
Joe Rogan challenged him on it.
yeah, and I think Kash Patel is a very good guy, and he may influence these things as well. Um, Jim, there's a lot of people on the edge of their seat right now, and they're obviously very inspired. Ladies and gentlemen, you also got to go to Jim's website, kennedysandking.com. And Jim, you not only follow the JFK assassination. You're telling the truth about Malcolm X assassination, MLK assassination, RFK assassination on that website. Tell us a little bit about your website and why people should be
Okay,
visiting.
kennedysandking.com is the website that I supervise and publish. And it's really the only website out there like that that does reviews of books, that does examinations of current events, okay, that does research articles on, and as you said, all four assassinations of the 1960s. Because I believe that you put them all together, you spell a big turning point uh, in American history. I also have a Substack site in my name. I just did a 5-part series on the October surprise, okay, which a very good book came out on that by Craig Unger. And so I decided to go ahead and do a series on that. So you have the Kennys and King site and you have my Substack site.
Fantastic. Jim, you might not think about it this second, as often happens, but sometimes when I get home and oh man, I should have asked that. I should have said that. Is there anything I should have asked you, or is there anything that you want to say just in this last minute or two? Just some final words of wisdom from you.
All right. The one thing that we should have talked about was we talked about Malcolm Perry, right? In the entrance wound in front of his neck. Kemp Clark was the other doctor at that press conference. He was the chief of neurosurgery at Parkland Hospital. Him and several other doctors saw a baseball sized hole in the back of Kennedy's skull. All right. And that is another strong indication that the bullets that hit Kennedy came from the front, because entrance wounds don't make big, ragged, jagged holes like that. The House Select Committee actually tried to cover this up. And again, this is outrageous. They said that the Bethesda witnesses did not see this hole. Only the Parkland witnesses saw it. Not only did they lie, they knew they were lying, because when this was all declassified, it came that the Bethesda witnesses saw the same thing that the Parkland Hospital witnesses did. So between the two locations, you have 42 witnesses who saw this big blasted out hole in the back of Kennedy's skull. So that's the last thing that I thought was very important that we should get out.
What are the chances that the View's gonna call you, or MSNBC? MSNBC. I mean, you would think that the media would be interested in what you're talking about. Our president was murdered. It's 60 years now. There's all of these questions, all of these things you're bringing up in your new book, and also as Annie is stressing, there's some kind of, either a lot of people are numb and just think it's normal, or we also have people that are maliciously just not asking these questions.
There is, I hate to say this, but it's true. There is a denial about this case, and it goes up to the upper levels of the media. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg did the narration for JFK Revisited and JFK Destiny Betrayed. Her and the late Donald Sutherland did the narration. So you would think that Oliver Stone would get on The View, okay? Because Whoopi Goldberg is supposed to be the leader of that group, okay? He didn't. He didn't. All right. So this is what I mean. Okay, there is a an orchestrated uh, denial in the upper levels of the media that do not want to address this subject, because I guess this will be my concluding remark. Not only did they miss the story about Kennedy's assassination, they missed this. The volumes of the Warren Commission came out, like I said, in late September of 1964. 3 months later, Lyndon Johnson went ahead and committed the first combat troops into Vietnam, something that Kennedy not only did not do, but he was adamant about never doing. Okay. Nobody put together those two stories.
Mm.
Oh, wait a minute. Kennedy didn't commit combat troops for 3 years. Now we have Johnson doing it in 3 months.
Mm.
Is there a connection between these two events? You know?
I think Kennedy also said he wanted to bust up the CIA into 1,000 pieces.
Yes, he did say that too. Yes.
Yeah.
He wanted to
Well,
break up the CIA and
yeah.
scatter it to the wind. He,
Yeah.
you know, and he did fire the top level. Okay, but in my
Yeah.
opinion, he didn't go far enough. It should have been
Yeah.
a total house cleaning.
And if I'm correct, they were approaching him with this operation. Let's kill some Americans and pretend Castro did it, and then we can invade Cuba. Yeah. And he didn't want to do that. And then the whole Bay of Pigs thing. So there's a lot of stuff there. Jim, last minute to you. Go ahead, or have we finished?
All right. Look, this has been a kind of disease that I believe has infected American society for a very, very long time. And it's a combination of denial, okay, denying of the facts about our history. The problem with doing that is if you deny one thing, you end up getting in this route towards total denial of everything. And so
Yes.
the same thing happened with Malcolm, with King, with Bobby Kennedy. All
Yeah.
right. And we can go on to these other scandals, these earth shattering scandals that we never got to the bottom of in
Mm.
this country. All right. So
Mm.
this is what I believe is, as they say, the kind of first step
Mm.
on the decline of both our government and the media.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having
Yeah.
me on.
And thank you so much, Jim. Where can people find you one more time?
KennedysandKing.com plus my Substack site.
Fantastic. Thank you for being such a stand-up guy. Thank you for fighting for the truth. We hope to see you back soon on the Glazov Gang, okay? Thank you, Jim.
Have a good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, the JFK Assassination Chokeholds that inescapably prove there was a conspiracy. Get that book. We'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.